that could stop us from getting there. I've got two things left. We're just going to start the prayer part tonight. Let me go back. We're going to go to Circle Maker. If you got your book, you can follow along with me a little bit, although it's not 100%. First of all, you give me a working definition of prayer. What is prayer? Communication with God. Come on, what's another definition? Prayer. What? Okay, something you do, though half the time we don't think it really works. What? Praising God. Definition, working definition of prayer. Communication, praise, what else? Developing or building a relationship with God. Okay, working on your prayer muscles. Mike and I, we were watching, what was that called? The something canoe or kayak? Kayak sprint. And there's one guy in a kayak for each nation, 500 meters, which is what, about 1,500 feet. And they were like, pew, 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 you rowing? I can't even do it. And I looked at that and I said, how do they do that? How can they do that? I mean, and their legs were, as one leg, how did that work? The opposite leg went while, this side rode, this leg pushed and like this. And I'm just amazed at that. And we watched the Olympic, all the gymnasts last night. I'm going, how do they do that? And besides being about 50 years younger than me, how do they do that? And you know how they do that is they build muscles. They exercise. And the unfortunate thing is, or the fortunate thing is, sometimes prayer is more an exercise in discipline. It can be. I mean, that's the truth. But it's not supposed to be, and doesn't have to be that way, but it can be. So, all of those things. The bottom line is, you name me a faith, and they're going to be praying. I was thinking today, I've seen the Muslim faith. They have their little minarets, and they go to the top, and they give out this. They have microphones, and those guys get up there, and they give, I can't remember what it's called. They give something. I don't know what the name of it is. But they stand out there, and they give this call to prayer, whatever it is, and which our lovely president said he really loves. And they give this call to prayer 5 times a day, and it doesn't matter where they are. They get their prayer rug. And if they're in the airport, if they're at Walmart, if they're really, 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 really zealots, doesn't matter where they are. Once it's that time, they kneel down, they face Mecca. I would be lost right there because I wouldn't know where's Mecca, And they kneel down and they pray 5 times a day. And do you know you've heard of Ramadan, 30 days of a month. And anybody know what month Ramadan's in? Is it September? It's what? So it varies, changes yearly, or? Okay. Bottom line, though, there's a month designated. They pray and fast 30 days. Now, they also go home and eat sometimes, I think, but nonetheless, they understand prayer. I was watching the Olympics, and I think some guy was from India. And I always thought prayer beads were Catholic, the Catholic Church, they did their Hail Marys, all Hail Mary, and they had their little rosary. This guy had his prayer beads, a Tibetan monk or something, and he was going through his routine, and he'd say something and push the bead and push the bead and push the bead. And it amazed me, I didn't realize that they had those things, but every faith understands and believes in prayer. Now, they're probably not praying to the deity as I understand him, but they're praying to their deity and they're asking for help. Why? Because if you're human long enough, you know you need outside help. You need somebody bigger than you to get you through and to give you some answers to help you through the difficulties of life, right? So in our Christian faith, we just happen to believe that's, as we sung tonight, our mighty God. How great is our God, Jehovah, Yahweh, Jesus? How great is our God as opposed to, and yet there are times when we all struggle, when we have prayed and our God has vanished. Anybody in here ever had God disappoint him? Heck yeah. From my expectations to what he is. So learning to pray is Christianity 101. We tell believers to pray, and we don't tell them how, we don't tell them why, we don't tell them the specifics. And what we're going to look about, and especially wrapped around this, are some specifics of how to pray. Let me see here. I got some stuff that's highlighted, and I need to say it, so get it out of here so you can see it. All believers pray, but if our understanding of prayer never grows past prayer is a tool to get what I want from God, if it never grows past that, then you've stymied in your Christian faith. At some point, you have to see prayer not just as a tool to receive, but as someone who ever said this, as a tool to develop a relationship with God. Listen, if the only time I ever talked to Mike was to ask him to give me something, that would be a pretty poor husband and wife relationship. We don't just talk when I need him to give me something. We talk. He's learned how to talk to me. I've made him talk to me. But your prayer at its basis level, bottom line is, prayer is, for many believers, just something to do to ask God for something. But as you grow and mature, hopefully, in your Christian faith, prayer becomes not just a tool to get what you need or want, but it becomes an avenue to know God. Because guess what? He speaks back to us if we'll give him the chance to. Now, let's move on. Let's start the Jericho story. Who can tell me? Well, let me go back. Let's read about Honai. How many read the story about Honai? Lift your hands if you know. All right. That's what I thought. So that's the reason I'm going to read it to you. I'll edit it as I read it, but here we go. The bottom line, there was a huge drought in the land of Israel. Threatened the people. Let me see. And the people of Israel, Jerusalem, came to a man named Honai. H-O-N-I. Or Honai, I don't know, whatever, Lord forgive me, whatever his name is. Honai, doesn't matter. So they came to him to pray for rain. With a 6-foot staff in his hand, Honai began to turn like a math compass. His circular movement was rhythmical and methodical. He made a circle, never looked up. He drew the circle, then dropped to his knees and raised his hands to heaven. With the authority of the prophet Elijah, who called down fire from heaven, Honai called down rain. This is what he said. Lord of the universe, I swear before your great name that I will not move from this circle until you have shown mercy upon your children. The words sent a shudder down the spines of all who were within earshot that day. It wasn't just the volume of his voice, it was the authority in his voice, not a hint of doubt. This prayer didn't originate in vocal cords. Like water from an artesian well, the words flowed from the depth of his soul. His prayer was resolute yet humble, confident yet meek, expectant yet unassuming, and then it happened. As his prayer ascended to the heavens, raindrops descended to the earth. An audible gasp swept across the thousands of congregants who had encircled him. Every head turned heavenward as the first raindrops parachuted from the sky, but his head remained bowed. The people rejoiced over each drop, but Honai wasn't satisfied with a sprinkle. Still kneeling, he said, "Not for such rain have I prayed, but for rain that will fill cisterns, pits, pits and caverns. The sprinkle then immediately turned into such a torrential downpour that eyewitnesses said no raindrop was smaller than an egg. It rained so heavily and so steadily that the people fled to the temple to escape the flash floods. But Hanai stayed and prayed inside his circle once more, a bold request. Not for such rain have I prayed, but for rain of your favor, blessing, and graciousness. Then, like a well-proportioned sun shower on a hot and humid August afternoon, it began to rain calmly, peacefully. Each raindrop was a token of God's grace. And they didn't just soak the skin, they soaked the spirit with faith. It had been difficult to believe in rain before the day. The day after the day, it was impossible not to believe. That's a true story. That's prayer circling. And from that story, captured by Mark Batterson, began the process of not a new concept. When I was a little girl growing up, my daddy used to say, you want revival? Get a piece of chalk, draw a circle around yourself, and pray until you get revived, and then it can spread to others. But circling a need in prayer, circling it, and then standing in that circle until the Father releases to you what you have faith. You have faith. Can I say that again? What you have faith to believe in. And so we learn that we draw a circle around our need. Now, in the first introduction to this book, he talks about Jericho. Tell me about the circle of Jericho. You guys know it as well as I do. What's the circle? Let's go back before Jericho. What was the promise given to Moses? That his people would be free and, well, let's go back even further than that. Let's go back to Abraham. What was God's promise to Abraham? Leave what you know and go where? Jackie? Okay, well, we'll get there. But leave what you know and go to a land that I will show you. And when he got to the land, God said, now walk around the land and claim it because I have already given it to you. The original promise that ended up in Jericho started back with Abraham. And then God said to Abraham, he said, these people that you're going to create, this generation, eventually you're going to have a son, and he's going to have all these descendants, and then they're going to be so numerous that like the stars in the sky, you can't be able to count them, like the sand on the seashore. And he said at some point, 400 years, they will be in slavery, but I will come to them after 400 years. And I love this because I just read this week. And God said, I will come to them after 400 years, and I will lead them out of slavery, and I will bless them beyond their wildest dreams with finances, basically is what God said. And so they go into Egypt, they're slaves 400 years, and then God sends a deliverer, Moses, and he says, now it's time to get the people out of Egypt and take them to the land I promised to their ancestor Abraham. I'm telling you tonight, what's going on inside of me as I'm saying this. And one of the points he makes in Circle Maker is that prayers never die. Bessie, prayers never die. The prayer you prayed on the day you got saved is still in effect with God. We just got to get you to know that. Prayers never die. And I know that my mother and my father prayed endlessly for revival to hit in this county. And that prayer has been sent to me for this house. Prayers never die. They are generational. I am absolutely convinced till the day I die, not one of you would be sitting in this place saved unless somebody somewhere had not prayed for you. You didn't just get saved errantly. Somebody interceded. That may have been just one prayer, God saved their soul, but it was enough to trigger the Lord to answer that. So Moses leads the people out. They come to the promised land. And you know the story? All they had to do was believe God's promise and walk into their promised land, and their destiny would be fulfilled. But they rebelled. They refused to go. And so Moses had to spend 40 stinking years running them around in a 40 years desert area. And then all those old people died. A new generation came forth. And it's Moses' time to die. And the mantle is now passed to Joshua. Mike said something the other day that I think all of us need to keep in our mind. You know, we have some people that we know who really, really, really want to move to this area. And I got an email from one of them. They said, well, when everything, basically when the stars line up, in other words, when I get this and this and this and this and this and this and this, then I'll move. And Mike said, you know what? The water never parts until you stick your toes in it. The waters never part until you, by an act of faith, say, that's where I'm going, and you make the move to open and part of the doors. And so Jericho, before Jericho, when they were getting into the promised land, the flood's there, and the priests stick their feet, and the minute they stick their feet in the Jordan River, it goes apart just like Moses did at the Red Sea, and they all walked apart, and they went and they began the process of fighting the enemy for the land God had already given them. And what happens? In Joshua chapter 5, 6, somewhere in there, they come up to the most powerful city in the world. It's Jericho at that time, or in that area. I was telling the kids about this in vacation Bible school. You know, walls so thick that you could run 2 chariots around it, so high, so big, so massive. No way you could get in there. And yet when God took Joshua there, he said to them, behold, the city I have given to you. Prayer, circle prayer starts many times with a promise from the Father. How many in this room have received a promise from the Father that has not come true yet? How many have received a promise from God that you haven't seen manifested yet? Every person. If you haven't, I'm sorry for you, you need to find one. But when God gives you a promise, you don't give up on God. And so what happened? How did Jericho's walls, and y'all know that the archaeological discovery, they've discovered Jericho. And you know, when I was a little girl and the walls came tumbling down, the idea, somehow I always imagined the walls just kind of fell over and they crawled over the walls and went in. Do you know when they discovered Jericho, the walls had literally been pushed down into the ground. They didn't fall over. It was like hordes of angels just got up there and started jumping, man, and pew, it just was like there and gone. And they went right over it. But how did that happen? How did that happen? They walked around it. 7 days. Once a day for 6 days, and on the 7th day, they walked around how many times? 7 days. Blew the ram's horn, and the hardest part of that whole walk wasn't the walking around. It was everybody being their mouths shut. I tried to do that for the kids at VBS, the older kids. I said, okay, we're going to walk around Jericho, and you can't talk. And, you know, we started walking. I was like, you're giggling. And I said, no, you can't talk. You can't talk. You spoil it. Do you imagine 1 million people or 2 million people with babies included walking around the walls and nobody talking? I have to gag, you know. Some mothers had gag them. Yeah, see, the baby stayed home with the nurses maybe. But they walked around it. They circled, and they circled, and they circled it until finally it did. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to have a prayer circle, you're going to have something in the middle of that. What's your prayer? Or in the words of Mark Batterson, what's your Jericho? What is your Jericho? What do you want to see God do for you? Define it. Jesus said, and this is where we fail and fail and fail and fail. Jesus said to Bartimaeus, the blind guy, he's sitting there blind. Now you know the story, it's in Mark chapter 10. He's blind, And it says at one point that when Jesus called him, he took his coat off. Well, what is he doing taking his coat off? In Bible times, someone who was blind and could legally beg wore a special coat that designated them. It'd be like one of our cards. I'm allowed to beg because, see, my ID says I can. Only in those days, it was a special kind of coat. And they wore it. And so here comes Jesus into Jericho. And Bartimaeus hears he's there, and all the people, and he's yelling for Jesus. And so Jesus says, bring him to me. And when they tell Bartimaeus, you can go, Jesus, he's calling you, it says he took his coat off. Well, you know what that was? It's an act of faith. What he is saying was, after I meet Jesus, I'm not going to need this coat to beg anymore because I'm going to be able to see. So he takes his coat off, he gets up, and the first thing Jesus said to him is not, hi guy, how you doing? So glad you obeyed me. But the first thing Jesus says to a blind man is, what do you want me to do for you? Now let's think about the irony of that. You're blind, you can't see nothing, you're standing in front of Jesus, and Jesus says to you, what do you want me to do for you? Well, duh. Could I say, duh? I want to see. And that's what he says. I want to see. And Jesus says, great, as your faith is so obedient to you. Pew! And he sees. Now, what would you answer Jesus if he came to you and said, what do you want me to do for you? You made my point. We wouldn't know what to say. Either we have so many needs we don't know which one to pick, or we've never thought about something that was so critical in my life that if I don't have it come through, I'm not going to make it. What would you say if Jesus came and said, what can I do for you? Now that's your assignment this week. Because the Word of God is very clear that for us to get responses in prayer, the prayers need to be specific. They can't be things like, oh God, make my life better. Oh God, fix my husband. Oh God, fix my car. You see, that number up there, that's a specific number. God gave me that number. That number came from God. I'm telling you, that did not come from my spirit. I've been here. We will finish our 24th year in November at this church, starting our 25th. And in the 24 years I've been here, I have always wanted, this has been my prayer, oh God, fill the church. Remember we prayed at an intercessor prayer. Oh God, fill this church with your glory and fill this church for your glory. Fill this church with your glory. And that's a nice prayer, but it's so vague. Well, what do even if the people aren't here, I can fill it with my glory. They're just sitting, I'm sitting in the seat. But this year, he gave me that number. You are to believe for 500 in your church. Then that's just the beginning. That's not the end. That's the starting number of what he wants to do. He gave me a specific number. You got to get specific. And your responsibility in this next week before we come together is you need to ask yourself, what do I specifically want to see God do? Well, you ask the Holy Spirit to narrow it down, because it's just like in counseling. People come to me and they have all these major problems going on in their life, and what we have to do is we have to get to the root. Because sometimes the problems that you see in your life are symptoms of a root. And so what you need to do is ask the Holy Spirit to show you what His will for you. Because if you pray according to His will, you will never, ever not get it. Let me read a quote that he has in Promise Prayer Circle. Well-developed faith results in well-defined prayers. And well-defined prayers result in well-lived lives. Define your Jericho. Don't just pray. Circle a promise. Don't just wish, oh, I wish God, oh, I wish. Do something specific. Bring a specific prayer to God. And that's your assignment this week. And the other assignment is get out Circle Makers and read it. It's awesome. And it'll stir your faith. I'm telling you, it'll feed your faith. It'll stir your faith. And maybe through that book, the Father will speak something to you and say, this is what you believe. This is what you believe for. Now, how does that work? Well, let me just explain one thing while the kids are coming in the wind. And some of you heard this story. But years and years and years and years ago, at the beginning of this church, over in the old Trendway building, when we were first here, and we had only been here about a month, they decided they needed a new piano. And I was right with them on that. Somebody had donated the piano, and they wanted it back. So they, instead of letting me pick the piano, they went out and bought an electric piano that was one of those kind you'd see in a garage, and you could put your finger on the key and it would chord. And he's like, da, 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 da. It was pathetic. It was an awful piano. Honestly, when I played it, it's an awful piano. I played on that piano, listen to me, I played on that piano faithfully for 2 years. After, one day I was playing that piano, and God showed me a piano he wanted us to buy. And it wasn't we didn't have room for a baby grand. It was an upright baby grand. It's called a baby grand in a box. And he said, you're going to get a new piano. And I saw it. I saw this piano in my mind. And there was no money for it, so I just kept playing every Sunday, 2 years on this stinking piano, just getting, And I just said, God, if you're going to give me, but here's the thing. God gave me the picture, and I stood in faith, believing God. Okay? I did not allow the time to suck out my promise. Did you get that? I did not allow the passing of time to suck out my faith in God's promise. I believed that He said I would get that piano. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I believed it. 2 years after I received the promise of the piano, 2 years, some of the people in the church would come to me after the service and they'd say, because we got a better sound system, and they would say, man, that piano sounds bad. Terry Collins probably doesn't remember this, but one Sunday morning, Terry came up to me and he said, boy, Mel, that piano sounds bad. We got to get you something better. You don't remember that, do you, T? Well, but he did, and I thought, all right. And you know what? Within weeks, the church said, go find a piano. And I was able to purchase the one I wanted and played on that until we gave it away. And we played clear, I think it was in here, wasn't it? Or did we ever bring it in the dome? It was in the old sanctuary. Now, what do I say by that? Listen to me. When you get the promise from the Father, don't let time steal your faith. God told me 500. I'm circling it not by going, okay, God, you said today, you said we'd run 500. Okay, God, you said we'd run 500 today, God. Okay, God, you said we'd run 500. Here's the number. I'm circling it. That's not what you do. I mean, you can if God tells you to. But my thing is, I'm circling it by saying, standing in faith saying, yes, sir, God, you said we're going to run 500. I don't know how, I don't know when, but daggone it, you're the one who gave me that figure, and you're going to do it because you gave it to me, and I'm standing in faith believing that you said it, and I'm going to see it. Maybe, I will see us run 500 in this house because that was the figure God gave me. I didn't pull it out of the air. You understand that? It's a lot easier to have faith to believe when God speaks it than it is when you just want something. But if your want is also added to, if the Father says go for it, then you go for it. I wanted a new piano. Man, did I want a new piano. And the Father saw the desire of my heart, birthed that in it, and all I had to do was stand in faith believing and not allow that to be eroded, and God gave me what I believed for. Find out this week, begin to ask. You may not hear an answer this week. Begin to ask. Begin to narrow it down. Begin to go to God and say, what is my Jericho? You know, for somebody that's got cancer, it's obvious what their Jericho is, healing. For somebody that's gone bankrupt, it's obvious what their Jericho is, money. But sometimes that's not so obvious. Find and look, this thing's filled with promises. How many have promises in the Word that God has given to you? My Word is filled, especially Isaiah. He speaks all the time. You'll go through my Bible. When I'm dead and gone, somebody can take my Bibles and they'll find a PP beside certain verses, and a CP beside certain verses, and an FP beside certain verses. What's the PP? Personal, personal promise. Something God spoke to me. My own personal. You can do whatever you want to. Personal promise. What's a CP? Church promise. What's an FP? Family promise. Someday when I'm dead, you can look them up and see if any of them came true. Doesn't matter whether they come true in my lifetime or not. Father gave them to me. When I was reading this thing, I knew that I knew that I knew. He was saying that was for me, and I claimed it. And I'm standing and believing it. Now, that's how you begin the process of circling in prayer. Define what you want. Let me tell, before we end, Becca was just talking tonight, and she, you know, we've heard this. Becca needed a house. And she said to the Father, I would like a house with 4 bedrooms. Doesn't have to have 2 bathrooms, that's okay. But at the very least, I need 4 bedrooms. I'd like to be out in the country. I'd like to be in the same school system. Doesn't really matter if we have a garage, but that would be okay if you throw that in. And she got very, 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 very absolute specific to what she wanted from the Father. How soon was it before you saw the ad? A week later, she saw an ad on Facebook or page there for a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, 2-acre house in the country in her school system, and went to it, and the people said, yeah, we'll let you move in, and we'll even let you paint the place in place of the deposit. Now, the enemy's trying to steal it from her right now. But daggone it, she's going to stand in faith and circle her dream because she knows that that house was given to her by God Almighty. And the only way the enemy can take it is if we give up and let him take it away from us. Find out your specific desire. Ask the Father to give it to you. And in the process, we as a church are going to begin to converge our energies, which is world language for faith, and begin to think, dream, and believe and see this church filled for 500. Mike says we can't have 500 in this building. Here, we'll have to go to the gym. Well, I'd like to just have 500 in here, one service, and then we can go to the gym. And we'd also have to buy some chairs. But not very many. But some of you be sitting in folding chairs. But wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be awesome to walk in on Sunday morning and look at your seat and go, hey, I don't know how to worship over there. Somebody got my seat. Wouldn't that be awesome? That's the reason, don't get comfortable in one place. Just kind of move around, sit in different places in the congregation, because you never know, some Sunday morning. Or you may have to bring your own chair. You never know. Beck? That's true too. We may not all be sitting. There may be chairs open. Okay, get yourself a dream board at your house. Get a dream board. Begin to put up on that thing. What do you want God to do for you? What do you want to happen in your life? Charlotte, what do you want in the food pantry? Man, begin to dream about it. I know you already are, but begin to make it a focal. You know, the thing that's so cool about that, when God spoke to Abraham and said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, what did he do? He took him outside and he said, look to the skies, look up there. And he gave him a visual to say to him, see that? That just like you can't count the stars, you will not be able to count your descendants. He'll give you a mental picture of something that he wants you to begin to believe for and dream for and circle. Man, get your faith moving. Man, some of you, your faith is as weak as my arm flab right here. You need to get your faith, better. Work on it, man. Work on it. Hey, I know what it's like to have your hopes and dreams crushed. I know what it's like to be disappointed. I know what it's like to have the wind taken out of your sails like it ain't going to happen. Many of you do too. But what do you do when that happens? You recuperate, you rest, and then you find a place where you can stand up and say, enough's enough, God spoke it, and I'm going to go forward, and if I die trying, I'll die, but I'll go trying. And you begin to get yourself back in the saddle, man. Do it. Begin to believe. Take the risk to begin to believe again. Take the risk. Yeah, you might be disappointed, but it's better than just giving up and nothing's going to happen. Might as well give up my life. Man, begin to believe. Man, I believe that the Lord could fill this room. He could fill this room with teenagers, and Jackie and them would have to take the other sanctuary for the kids. Awesome? Wouldn't that be awesome? Man, let's begin to be free to believe. Dream. Heck, you never get nothing if you don't dream a little bit, for crying out loud. I'm feeling like the Lord's saying to you, I can't do anything. This is what God is saying to us as a congregation. I can't do anything without your faith. I can't do anything without your expectation. You got to work with me, people. That's what he's saying with us. Work with me. Believe with me. Dream for me. I feel like God's saying this to us tonight. He's saying, my dreams for this house are bigger than your dreams, but your dreams have gotten smaller because you haven't seen my dreams come to pass. But it doesn't mean I don't want him to. Dream with me. Dream with me. Man, I keep hearing him say, work with me, people. Work with me. I just hear him saying that. Come on, work with me. I'll let you go after this. Years ago, Vicky, I don't know how many years it was, she saw Jesus, and he was in a wheat field, and she said, he was, wow, had his sleeves rolled up and was just cutting down the wheat and baling it, and she said he was saying to her, come and help me do this. Well, it takes faith, expectation. You ought to come in here every Sunday morning expecting God to do something you'd never seen before. And most of us just come here and expect somebody else to stir our fires, like Mel or Katie or Josh or the band or somebody on stage, because you don't believe anymore. You don't believe. I'm feeling the Lord's telling me this tonight. I'm not yelling at you, but we've lost our corporate belief and our corporate faith because of some of the things we've gone through as a congregation and some of the things you've gone through in your personal life. And he can't do it if we don't work with him. So ask him to turn on the spigot of faith. It's a catch-22. Our faith staggers because we don't see a miracle, but we don't see a miracle because our faith staggers. And so nothing happens. So let's do it. Stand up. Hey, you got issues in your life? Trust the Father. If he doesn't give you the answer you're looking for, he'll give you an answer. God will make a way when there seems to be no way. He works in ways we cannot see. God will make a way for me. He will be my guide, draw me closer to his side with love and grace for each new day. God will make a way.